The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to All You Can Eat. It's the podcast about deliciousness. I'm your host, Rob Rosenthal. Welcome to episode number 81, coming to you live, and I mean live. It's Wednesday at 8 o'clock. Well, I always, that's not unusual. That's when we do it here. June the 3rd, right around week 10 of whatever this thing that we're in, this pandemic, this isolation, sequestration, call it what you want. I'm into a solid 70 days of living a whole different kind of existence. I know you are all as well. I hope and trust that everybody is happy and good. You know, one of the things about being in this kind of, COVID kind of crisis mode here and staying inside is that a lot of us are doing more cooking at home, and some of us, and I mean me, are doing more drinking. I mean, I'm doing some professional level drinking, and I mentioned that because right now I'm going to do, now it's 8 o'clock here on the East Coast, but 5 o'clock on, for example, West Coast time, which is happy hour, and the sound that you hear, my friends, is the sound of cocktail being shaken, and I am about to pour a nice cold one into this glass right here. And I want to remind everybody that tonight's show is about whiskey. And I don't know a lot about whiskey, which is why on tonight's show I have a guest who's going to be with us momentarily. His name is Paul Goldman. And Paul, what does he do? He produces, he makes, distills, if you will, packages, markets, and sells a beautiful whiskey product, which I am now about to sip on. Hang on a second. And it's called Kansas Clean Distilled Whiskey. So hang in, everybody, for tonight's show, because we're going to talk a lot about whiskey with Paul Goldman. Now, before we start up there, I'll tell you, that cocktail is really good. I'm going to give you the recipe for it because Paul gave it to me. It's a way to make whiskey if you're not drinking it like straight out of the bottle and you want to turn it into a cocktail. Oh my, this is good. And it reminds me that, people often say to me, because I'm a food guy, that what's your favorite meal? And the first thing I think about is, is my favorite meal like breakfast? Is it lunch? Is it dinner? And then I go, no. Then the question could be not the meal occasion, but like, what's your favorite meal? Like, is it a pizza? Well, in my case, yes, it's always going to be pizza. But I've started to think that during these past 10 weeks, my favorite meal is happy hour. I mean, I'm happy just, crafting up a cocktail or cracking open a bottle of vino or whatever it is that your pleasure is, whether it's beer or wine or a spirit or whatever it is. And my side order for that particular occasion is right now I'm having, for example, salt and vinegar chips and some pistachios. And what I would like to say is if one day, if I ever do a show that's entirely on nuts, I have determined that much as I love pistachios, I mean adore pistachios, which I buy by the shit ton over at Costco, because many of you who have heard the show before know I am the Costco ho, and I do spend an hour of my week there, pretty much every week of my life, even in these difficult times. And a certain portion of my disposable income is dedicated to the Costco product as well. And they do sell the pistachios by the metric ton. But I got to say that it turns out that I have a little bit of an addiction to the Virginia peanut. And when Costco sells them, they're not selling you like a little bag that you would get that you used to get on a plane. When Costco sells Virginia peanuts, you buy them essentially by the kilo. So I have gone through, 4 or 5 pounds of salted Virginia peanuts over at the Costco, and with whatever kind of cocktail. We're going to talk tonight about whiskey. This drink that Paul has turned me on to is extraordinarily good, so we're going to get to that. And since I'm on the subject of Costco, there's a couple of recommendations that I'm going to make to you before we start on whiskey, which is, because I do that. That's what I do. I recommend things. That's my gig. That's my job. And the first thing that I am going to recommend is the product that would be perfectly good during this happy hour because it's crunchy and it's salty and it's tasty. And it's called Wild, W-I-L-D-E, and they are chicken chips, which is weird. I mean, it's so weird, in fact, that I can't actually get anybody else in my family to try them because they're kind of, they don't understand what it means that it's a chicken. It's crispy, it is salty, but rather than being potato-y, it is simply made with chicken breast. And it comes in flavors, like, for example, Nashville hot chicken, or the one I'm trying right now, which is the chicken and waffle flavor, which is quite tasty and sweet. I've had their chicken, their jalapeno chicken. So all I want to tell you folks is this. If you're interested in trying something different, sweet or salty or sour, whatever flavor that you would have in a potato chip, but it's made with actual chicken breast, what you're going to want to do is go to wildbrands.com. That's W-I-L-D-E brands.com, and then, see for yourself. I don't know if you can, there may be a minimum order to get these things online, but if not, they sell them in the, in the supermarkets, right? So I would recommend for you Wild, W-I-L-D-E, brands.com to go get yourself some chicken chips if that's your thing. It means that, for example, you're getting protein rather than getting carbohydrates. I mean, they still have plenty of, calories and stuff like that, but they're flavorful and they're different. So there's that for happy hour. Now, I will also throw at you, speaking of the Costco, that one of the things I picked up there also was this Robert Rothschild. Now, if I say Robert Rothschild, the first thing that comes to mind is I must have picked up a bottle of wine, but instead, it's roasted pineapple and habanero, kind of a glaze. Well, because it's Costco, the bottle is large enough that I've actually used it for the last 3 meals. Some of it I used on lamb that I had put on the grill. Some of it I put on chicken that I roasted last night in the oven. Some of it I put somewhere else, but I really like it. Pineapple habanero, roasted pineapple and habanero glaze. You get that at Costco as well, Robert Rothschild. And I'll tell you what, you don't need a ton of it. Like, for example, in roasting a chicken last evening, I roasted chicken for the whole 60 minutes. And then for the last 5 minutes under the broiler, I dump on a bunch of this pineapple habanero glaze, put it under the broiler until it gets like all, bubbly and brown and it's crispy. And then all of a sudden you get a little bit of sweet, you get a little bit of heat. Lovely product. And finally, on the product mix tonight, another Costco, another giant bottle. Solistato is the brand. All you need to know is that it's an olive spread, a muffaletta olive spread. And if you don't know precisely what I'm talking about when I say muffaletta olive spread, let me put it to you like this. If somebody said you got to pick one city in these United States to live in, if you're going to if you could live in one city just to eat for the rest of your life, much as I love New York and I'm happy, in Miami, I'm good in Portland, Oregon. San Francisco, lovely. Seattle is good. New Orleans is the answer to that question because there's just an awesome amount of great food over in New Orleans. And one of the things they make is the muffaletta sandwich. And one of the things that they put on muffaletta sandwich is the olive spread. Well, now that's available to you here at the Costco. And the answer is, let's see, it's Solistato muffaletta olive spread. Man, that stuff is really good. And final housekeeping note tonight before we talk about whiskey is that tomorrow night, Thursday, June 4, not even night, but it's 5 o'clock. Like happy hour on the dot tomorrow. I give an online class that anybody could sign up for if they want to. And it's called 15 Herbs and Spices That Excite. What can I tell you about the class? I've been to a lot of places around the world in my life. I've eaten in 4,000 restaurants on 6 continents. I've tasted a lot of good stuff. I went to cooking school and I wrote a cookbook, and I have identified 15 herbs and spices that are just extraordinary, easy to get your hands on. You can, like now, you can just push a button and everything gets delivered to your home. And they make a fundamental difference to the food that you are eating, my friends. You know that anybody who's heard my show before knows that my formula is a little bit lazy, most taste with the fewest ingredients and the least effort. And one of the best and most efficient ways to achieve that is with herbs and spices. For example, if I took a chicken breast or a chicken thigh or a chicken wing or any part of the chicken that you want, and I hit it with a spice called berbere, which is Ethiopian spice blend with like 11 different flavors in it, and that's all I put on that chicken, and I roasted the heck out of it. That would be, I don't need to add another thing to that for it to be an extraordinary piece of chicken. So I call it 2 ingredients because the berbere happens to be, shaken out of a bottle. But within that bottle, there are about 11 different flavors: cardamom, cinnamon, and 10 or others that I can't even recall. Anyway, the long story short, and then, by the way, it wouldn't hurt to throw a little bit of that Rothschild roasted pineapple habanero glaze on that as well. But the point I make is that tomorrow at 5 o'clock, if you want, you can join in. I don't know what they charge for this thing, somewhere between $20 and $30 for the hour and a half. But you will learn about 15 herbs and spices that will forever change the way that you eat for the better. How are you going to go here? I don't even know where to tell you to go. You can find me. Here's what you do. If you want to join this class for tomorrow at 5 o'clock, you find me. Easiest way is send me an email, shortorderdad@gmail.com, shortorderdad@gmail.com, or find me on social media, because you can get Short Order Dad on Twitter, or you can get Real Rob Rosenthal on Instagram, or whatever it is that you do. Apparently there's a phone number at registration desk. You could also try 646-505-5708. That's 646-505-5708, and tell them you want to register for this class. 5 o'clock tomorrow, live on Zoom. Going to be good fun, and really will make a difference from here on out in anything that you eat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the subject at hand, which is whiskey. And I confess, as a food guy, that my entire focus and orientation and experience base is in and around food. My understanding of things that you drink is a little bit more peripheral and somewhat ephemeral. And I like vodka, and I like gin, and I'm happy with tequila. I'm good with rum. I like wine in every different color and phase. I'm happy to drink the beer. But I'll be honest, I don't know a ton about whiskey. In fact, since I had a bad experience with a rusty nail in college, I spent 30 years not drinking anything that was brown. That changed about 5 years ago when I was invited to take a tour of the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky. And all of a sudden I said, you know what? I've been missing something, because this bourbon is some good stuff, right? So then all of a sudden I'm drinking something brown. A year or two later, I get invited on a trip to tour Ireland, and I end up at the Jameson factory. And of course, you do an Irish whiskey tasting. And I think, you know what? That's not bad either. And then the next thing you know, I find out that my old friend Paul, who I've known, I'm going to say late 80s. So let's say if we made it even 30 plus years, I know Paul because we were in the advertising business together. Paul was a talented copywriter who went on to write some really well-known, famous, if you will, television commercials. Became a global television producer, shot commercials for big clients and big brands around the world. And then somewhere along the way, we'll talk about this, developed this brand of whiskey, which is unlike any that I've ever seen before, because it literally is clear. Paul, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Rob. How you doing, man?
Well, honestly, I haven't even gone more than 2 sips into this cocktail you turned me on to, but I feel good already. Thank you.
Well, that's the whole point of that cocktail, and hopefully the point of the whiskey.
Yes. Now, I want to see if I can. Now, seriously, I didn't do any homework intentionally because I wanted to just dump out every possible question that I had. But I just want to start with, tell me if I'm right, or tell me that I'm wrong. I remember meeting you in the late '80s, though, over there in on Madison Avenue, literally in New York City. And my recollection is not only that you were a guy from Northern California, but I'm starting to think it was like Tiburon. It could be Mill Valley, but I'm thinking, is Tiburon where you are from?
No, that's far too posh. I was from a working class town in east of San Francisco, about 30 miles, called Concord, which was sort of a bedroom community for oil refineries and more oil refineries.
Well, look at you. Okay, well, as I said, I knew that. There you go. I would be wrong. Okay, well, I was right about the fact that it was somewhere up in the northern part of California.
But we can say I'm from Tiburon.
No. I'm not looking to make up stuff. Now, Paul, let me ask you a question. What made you, I know that we're not at the whiskey thing yet, but what made you do advertising?
What made me do advertising? My sister was working at a PR firm, Porter Novelli, I think it was, in LA. And I was doing nothing in the early 80s. I was in a heavy metal band, which more often than not goes as you would expect it to go. And so I'm just wandering around, not knowing what to do with my life. And she said, you should become a copywriter because those are for people who don't know what to do with their life and can actually make a living at it. So I checked out a couple of books. She said, and you can have long hair. That's long gone now. And wear jeans to work. So it's like a professional job, but you don't have to be a professional.
Nice.
And so I studied, took some classes, took some adult education classes, and put together a spec portfolio of work and sold my Marshall stack and moved to New York. Got a job at TBWA.
Excellent. So that was your first gig over there where I met
you? More or less. I had a 2-week gig at a small agency that didn't like me. So,
and I'm right that you went on to produce some very high profile, to write some very high profile advertising.
Being in the right place at the right time and being with good people, when you're younger, you sort of attribute it to your own talent. But when you're a little older, you realize a lot of it is timing and good fortune and being in the hands of people who may recognize something and give you some opportunities. So, I wrote some good commercials, directed some pretty decent commercials, but I'd always had, and this is based on, our working together at the same place. We used to work on the Absolute campaign.
That is correct.
And I always thought, well, I'm the guy staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning. You're the guy staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning. We're busting our balls, really trying to, get work out. How hard can it be to turn a few knobs and produce vodka? Right. If I already got the advertising background, maybe someday I can make a spirit. So I'd always have that in the back of my mind.
What better background is there for making a spirit than writing advertising copy? Right.
Well, yeah. So, because I thought, well, I know the marketing part. How difficult can the rest of it be? So,
how difficult is it?
It's way harder than advertising. Just because there's a lot of competition. There are a lot of exceptional brands,
right?
And then there are so many layers of other aspects of the business that you certainly don't recognize when you're 24, thinking that you can conquer the world. So and also, advertising is a service business,
right?
And when you own a brand, your decisions are long term, so it's much more difficult.
Well, here's the key question for you. I want to get to the basics because, like I said, I don't know anything about it. So, whiskey, I'm confused even as to whiskey, what it is because. Like I said, I've had the Irish whiskey. I know that there's a thing called Scotch whiskey. I assume that bourbon is a whiskey, and then you got your thing. So, what is whiskey?
So, and you're right, all of those are whiskeys. Whiskey has to be made with a grain. Okay, so you can make other spirits with grain, but whiskey must be made with grain. However, it's possible. I've heard that they don't make it with grain in India. But I believe the rest of the world, you have to make it with grain. Scotch has to come from Scotland.
Okay.
And is you make it with the grain that grows there nearby. So in Canada, which is older weather, there's a lot of rye that grows in Canada. So rye whiskey traditionally comes from Canada, although a lot is being produced in the United States now. Scotch is made with barley. American whiskey is made with corn because it not only is it subsidized, it grows really well here.
Right.
And so, a whiskey must be made with grain. And then from within that, each country has its own specific laws as to how certain whiskeys must be made. So bourbon, for example, must be made with 51% corn.
Interesting. And right, okay. And what's the connection? I know this is a side note, but why do you think Kentucky is the place that is famous for bourbon?
I honestly don't know the history of that, but I will say now, especially in the last 10 years, even less, there are some astonishingly good bourbons coming out. And there are great bourbons. So, I mean, one of my favorite whiskeys is Maker's Mark. You have all these craft whiskeys, but if you want an awesome bourbon...
I'm sorry about this, by the way. I'm sorry about
really beat Makers. That said, there are astonishingly good craft bourbons coming from all around the country now, and some good ones coming out of right here in New York, actually.
I didn't mean to cut you off in a very important moment. You like Maker's Mark bourbon, is what you're saying, a lot.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm not a huge bourbon fan. We all have our preferences. Bourbon, to me, kind of has a narrow... Bourbon is like a blues song or a haiku. Like, there's a very strict sort of formula that you have to stay within, and it's the nuances within that formula that you must adhere, and it's where you find the differences in characteristics of a bourbon. But that said, it's always consistent. Maker's Mark, it's always good. It's got I don't know how they get that sort of pecan pie quality out of it. I have my thoughts. I think it's just, for a straightforward bourbon, there are some really fancy ones, obviously, but I mean, it's like Johnny Walker. I mean, Christopher Hitchens, the great writer and raconteur, used to say that wherever he would go, he would always drink Johnny Walker Black. And the reason why is because no matter where he traveled in the world, he knew he could get a Johnny Walker Black, and that would always taste like Johnny Walker Black.
Right. It makes sense. Now, let's talk about, two things. Before I ask you specifically about Kansas, my question to you is, now that we know that we have a grain, generally in the United States, corn is a good one to use. Now that we know that we have a grain, we're just for a 6-year-old, what is the process? What does the process entail? How do we get from corn to whiskey?
Well, the key is really, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of calls and write-ins after this, but as I see it, it's really the yeast. You develop a yeast called, so the way it works, and this is for all alcohol, is yeast consumes sugars, and they pee ethanol, and they burp carbon dioxide. That's it. So whether it's grapes or whether it's potatoes or whatever it is, grain, they consume the sugars. When a grain or a fruit or whatever ages after a time, or even a bread, there are sugars that are produced. And even if you leave, I know that in North Africa, they make a lot of breads that actually have a little bit of alcohol in them. If you leave something out over time, the yeast sort of collect either through air or through a culture that you've created yourself, and they consume the sugars in that. And in whiskey, it's called a mash. And that's where you combine certain grains, and they consume, or rum, it could be sugar cane. They consume the sugars and whatever it is that's sitting around, and they produce the alcohol, and then you just boil it, essentially. The alcohol evaporates. You separate that from the water, and you put, then you may age it, or you may let it, if it's vodka, you want to boil it until it's nothing but ethanol. And you keep boiling it and distilling it and distilling it. And then other alcohols like rum or like whiskey, you don't boil it up to such a high temperature so that you retain some inherent flavors of the original mash of the grains or fruits or whatever alcohol that it is that you were fermenting.
Now, what have you done here with Kansas? What have you created? Because the most distinguishing characteristic of Kansas is that it's clear.
It's nearly clear. We like to say it's the color of Chanel, but for your radio podcast listeners, it needs to have a little bit of picture. If it's okay, I'd like to sort of go back in time to sort of. I didn't come up with the whiskey. I came up with the understanding for a need, I guess, given my marketing background.
Talk about
it. So I was on a TV commercial job in England. Wife and kids were there. We were staying at Brown's Hotel, a hotel in which Winston Churchill used to drink at the bar. Wife said, why don't we sneak, kids are here, it's safe, where they're not going to do anything. Why don't we sneak downstairs and get a drink? And she's not a drinker. And so she was really excited we could leave the kids in the room. So we went downstairs. I poured over the cocktail menu. And she was so excited, she couldn't decide on what she wanted. And I said, what? They have some incredible whiskeys here, like unbelievable scotches and some really rare bourbons. And she said to me, I want to have fun. I'm not here to
in general,
like consider the essence of something. I just want to enjoy something. I want something with an umbrella in it. And I thought, and you would understand this, given your marketing background, that if you think about gin, you can have fun with the gin, and you think about vodka, you can certainly get into trouble and have some fun with vodka and rum drinks and tequila drinks. But whiskey has been always this sort of serious drink that, you think of like game birds and people hunting and tweed, and sort of there's this legacy and a history. And it's also dark and also perceived that you had bad experience with a rusty nail, oftentimes really strong and doesn't necessarily agree with a lot of people. So I sort of took a cue from my wife, and I thought, you know what? She's right. What is the whiskey that you can just enjoy, right? Like, just have it rather than contemplate it. You don't need to read Proust while you're drinking all the time. So I thought, I'm going to make that whiskey. I'm going to make a whiskey because I'm a huge whiskey fan. I'm going to make the whiskey that I like, but also something that, other people who might not like whiskey would like as well. And so I didn't know anything about making whiskey. I just Googled this. I went upstairs, Googled distilleries for sale, spent the weekend looking for distilleries for sale, and flew out to Kansas. Talked to a couple of people, and it kind of took off from there.
You know what I love so much about that story is, everything. First of all, because I've been to Brown's. To actually produce a radio commercial for Carlsberg beer starring Peter Ustinov, and he was the one who was choosing the hotel, so we ended up at Brown. But what I love about the story is that you actually had the aha moment. Like, literally, your wife's going fun, and you're in a place that specializes in whiskey, and you kind of go, wait a second, maybe I could bring some fun to whiskey. Now,
and it was, but then just rewinding back to, 19 blah, 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 late 80s, I'd always wanted to do my own spirits brand. I just knew I didn't have a point of view. Like, am I going to just make another bourbon? There's so many good ones. Am I going to make another rye? I wanted something that was completely different, that would hopefully bring people to whiskey while, having whiskey drinkers also appreciate it, but bring new people to whiskey so that they can understand what it is that there is to love about it without all the marketing tropes of, geezers and pickup trucks and, kilts and bagpipes and whatever, which is fine. That's all good. But you and I know that that's just marketing, and it's, legacy, old things, old type fonts and things like that. I thought, you know what, let's just not do that. Let's do something completely different. But it came back. It comes from me having this, you and I working together 100 years ago, and me wanting to create something different.
Yeah. Now here's what I would like to tell you, that I have gone through the cocktail. So when we have a moment later, we're going to talk about what went into that cocktail. But I mention that because right now, for my next drink, I've poured myself some Kansas Neat, and so I'm going to be drinking it, neat. I don't even have an ice cube because the studio that I'm in doesn't have I have no access to the ice tray, which is fine. And I'm going to be drinking it like neat, straight up, no nothing. And the first thing, of course, that you notice is, you can call the color what you want, but it's essentially, if not clear, I don't know what the difference between clear and colorless is. It doesn't look like what you would expect whiskey to look like. It tastes really, really good. I mean, it's really the product is really delicious. So, what led you to Kansas, and what do you? How do you define kind of like what you're drinking there? Like what am I drinking now?
Right. Okay. So the first thing is we don't add color in some parts of the country, and certainly in parts of Scotland, you are legally allowed, and you can add color to your whiskeys here. Mm-hmm. But I thought, you know what? We already know what a dark, and I love them. Believe me, I love them. We already know what a dark brown, what that expected taste is like. Let me just leave it natural, and it's not necessary to add any color. Mm-hmm. So when I flew out to talk to this distillery for sale, and I said, "Look, I know what I want. I don't know anything about making a whiskey." And then he went through, there are over 36 types of whiskeys designated by the government in the United States. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, you can make this, you can make that, you can make this, you can make that. And he came upon this one type of whiskey. He said that this is the least known whiskey, which is called a spirit whiskey. And I said, well, what's that? And then he described it, and I went, okay, well, that sounds interesting, because I could see how the combination of the ingredients in the process in a spirit whiskey could lend to the kind of accessible taste that I had in my mind. Mm-hmm. I never went with that distiller, and in fact, I would love to say that I do distill it myself, but I go through a contract distiller because those guys can do it way better than I can. But I went through a contract distiller. I said, I want to make a spirit whiskey. They didn't even know what the hell it was. But we discussed it, and it took 2 years actually to develop, and over 72 versions until we finally came upon the blend that we did. And that's why it has such a light characteristic and why it's so insanely smooth. I think it's, smooth, yeah.
Well, beyond smooth, which it is, it's got a, I like it a lot. I mean, it's delicious to me. It's got a slight sweetness. Like, I'm drinking it now, neat, and I feel like, sure, it would be good as an aperitif. It also feels to me like I could drink it after the meal, like in lieu of a, like one of the like a digestivo type of thing. It's there's something really, and I'm not just saying this because it's you. I have no capacity to bullshit, but there's something. It's very easy. It goes down easy. It's easy to drink. It has a lovely taste. It has a slight kind of sweetness to it. It's delicious. Really, it's great.
Well, thank you. That's just the combination of the grains we use,
Right.
the distillation process that we use,
Mm-hmm.
and what happens is when something doesn't burn, and that's due to the fact that we remove as many of the bitter, harsh alcohols that we can in our distillation process, the sweetness actually comes through. So a typical Scotch, especially Scotch, and I guess some bourbons, although I haven't done a lot of research on the Brix content of bourbon. But so a measurement of sugars, whether it's a Snickers bar or milk or or an orange juice, you measure the sugar in a system called the Brix level, and our sweetness is actually less than many Scotches and some bourbons, which means it's got less calories. But it's not because it's sweeter; it's because that sort of subtlety comes through, rather than the burning part of the alcohols coming through, which then overwhelm your palate and don't allow you to sort of get that sort of creamy quality that I think you're tasting.
That is a shockingly good way of describing this. It's the absence of something that allows for the natural sweetness to show up on the tongue. That's really good. Now, that's really good. I'm super impressed. I'm not a whiskey drinker, and I like drinking. I mean, I think I've made that clear.
Yeah, me too.
I like drinking a lot, and I would not well, this is unusual, and it's delicious. I guess at this point, before I ask you kind of further about that, I feel like we should tell people, now that I'm drinking it kind of like neat, what went into the cocktail that I had prior to this, because it was, I think one of the, like, I had this sense with Kansas that, like, I wasn't coming at it from the standpoint of, oh, this is why you made it. I was coming at it from kind of like, what's the consumer reason or advantage? And when you have a clear looking, I mean, if not clear, I mean, it's kind of colorless. It doesn't look like other products. It lends itself to kind of like a new audience and new drinkers. And it also lends itself to, well, maybe you're not drinking it neat. Maybe it makes a nice cocktail. Anyway, I guess obviously it's kicking in at this point, but the question ultimately is this. Let's talk about that little cocktail that I made myself that you turned me on to with the with the Cointreau and the lemon and the honey syrup. Tell people what's in that thing.
So that drink is specifically 2 parts Kansas, 1 part Cointreau, the juice of 1 lemon, a little bit of honey syrup, which is just honey diluted in a little bit of warm water, so it's not so sticky, and shaken and strained into a martini glass. That cocktail, and then it was originally conceived to be garnished with gold flakes. This was a mixologist who had created this for a Golden Globes after party in LA, the Chateau Marmont, by a good friend of mine who was hosting that party. And I tasted it and I thought, oh, we have to co-opt that one. The gold flakes notwithstanding, it's just a really clean, refreshing cocktail. But that was also part of going back to this moment in Browns. Now, I don't like cocktails with umbrellas in them unless I'm in, like, Curacao or Aruba. But the idea of a whiskey that is actually flexible enough, that has some body, that has character to it, but doesn't overwhelm, was part of my original sort of inspiration, that I wanted to make sure that this was a whiskey that you could use in cocktails as well as enjoy neat. If you use vodka, when somebody says, oh, I don't like whiskey, and you say, well, what do you like? And they say vodka, really what they're saying is, no, I like cranberry juice.
Right.
And so what is, it just worked out this way, and I didn't think it would as well as we were really quite fortunate. There's just enough sort of body and character in Kansas so that when you do make a vodka-based cocktail, or even a rum, and like even a mojito, if you make a mojito with Kansas, it just has a little bit more character than you would otherwise have with a white rum, because there's more flavor, right? So it's not just lime and sugar and mint muddled into some alcohol. There's some other depth and another layer of flavor that's sort of built into it when you use the whiskey.
I hear you. I don't disagree one iota. I will tell you that I'll have a nice a mojito, but I can now see exactly what it is that you said. I could make that same mojito with this Kansas and get it and get a different kind of orientation, get a different whole kind of flavor fun. I'm good with that.
This is dangerous when you start doing things like a mojito or a cosmopolitan. It's
well, here's another one for you. I don't know that I mean you probably thought about this, but I ended up spending a whole lot of time in Brazil. I mean I was probably back and forth 50 times, and the famous drink down in Brazil is the caipirinha.
Yeah,
which is made with the cachaça, which is from the sugarcane, and it's simple because you're talking about sugar and lime, and then the distilled, and then the cachaça. Well, I mean, you could easily replace the cachaça with Kansas as an example.
I got to say, Rob, the cachaça, the caipirinha is probably the great all-time summer cocktail. There really nothing beats a caipirinha, and it's because cachaça is fermented in a different way than rum, and so you get a lot more character. You can actually taste the yeasty sort of quality of cachaça, a good cachaça. And a caipirinha, I can say that Kansas can hold up to a mojito, but I can't say that Kansas will hold up to a caipirinha. That is my favorite. Other than the drinks that I drink with this whiskey, there is nothing better than a caipirinha. That is brutally good.
Well, let's take a quick break at that point, because I mean I think it's bluntly, it's very honest of you. But I think a couple of things. So we owe it to the people to understand, first of all, the caipirinha. 3 ingredients, which is great. One of which is a whole lot of fresh lime juice, which is muddled, and then that's accompanied by sugar. And like with everything else in life, there are better limes and better sugar. But even if you just had an average lime, an average Domino sugar, you would muddle some cut up lime, a half, let's call it, that you cut up into little pieces. You would muddle that into the bottom of a glass. You would add a teaspoon or 2 of sugar to it, and you would have the base of the caipirinha. And then the only other ingredient that you're adding to it is the cachaça. And like everything else in life, as I like to say, there are different levels. I mean, there's cachaça, and then there's high-end cachaça. In Brazil, historically, they would use the cheap stuff, the brand.
Yeah, the P2. Yeah,
the P2 or 51, they would call it, because 51 was the brand. I don't know why it was called 51, but I can tell you this: in the 50 trips that I made back and forth to Brazil, there was not one trip that I didn't come back with as many bottles as I could handle of 51 that I actually picked up at the airport in Brazil, Paul. And I'm talking about in those days, and again, it's mid-90s or early 90s or whatever it is. It was like cachaça, cheap cachaça was $3 a bottle at the airport.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, I also have a brand in my booze closet here. It's called Nega Fulô. I don't even know what it translates into, but that cachaça, rather than being $3 a bottle, is probably $30 a bottle. In any case, even a cheap caipirinha made with cheap cachaça and a crappy lime and good and crappy sugar and standard sugar is a lovely cocktail.
It's an awesome cocktail.
Well, so two things to note here. That one, You can also make that cocktail and replace the cachaça with vodka. Down in Brazil, they would call that the caipirosca, which kind of would be like a Russian. That was their way of saying like it's a Russian caipirinha. You would replace the cachaça with some vodka. Perfectly good. But I'm going to tell you this right now. When this weekend comes around and I can get some limes in my house, I'm going to be making the Kansas-based caipirinha, because I feel I'm going to check it out, but I feel like that could be pretty great. That's all I'm saying. That's the long way around. Is I feel like there's something about what you got here in this bottle and in this glass, which I think would make a perfectly good, super good cocktail with nothing more than fresh squeezed lime juice and sugar.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it is good. It's its own, it has a different taste than a caipirinha, and certainly a mojito. We were going to do, during this COVID period, we were going to do a series of, I couldn't get it together because I couldn't get the production together, but we were going to film drinks you could make with Kansas from the, ingredients from the back of your fridge. So whether that's like pickle juice, some marmalade, some honey, some fruit that, blueberry, whatever that you just got lying around, because at the initial stages of this pandemic, nobody was going out, at least not in this neck of the woods here in the Northeast, and so I wanted to put together a series of get some bartenders, some mixologists who have contributed to our website or posted some of their drinks on Insta. None of them would come out.
Why?
Well, because it's just everyone was freaked out, and two, I couldn't get a production together. I mean, you know what production is like. There's crews and camera and film and people and humans, and nobody wanted or could. We couldn't really facilitate a production environment that was safe in order to do it successfully.
All right, Paul, let me help you over here, because somewhere over these 10 weeks, I have put out a solid half dozen I call them homemade, but homemade videos that show up in the world of Instagram and Facebook and whatever. They run anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds of different kind of foods that I've been cooking while I'm here. We don't need your experience as a professional international television producer. Everything now is homemade, and it's actually preferred. So what I'm going to tell you is right now, somewhere between when we end this phone conversation and we move on to whatever the next phase is, I think I want to figure out whether or not I make a cocktail. I'm not a mixology guy. I'm not a cocktail guy. Whether or not I think what I'm going to do is here's what I'm proposing. I think I do the homemade version where I'm going to do two things. I'm going to make a cocktail, and I already know what it is. It's going to be the American version of the caipirinha using Kansas. And then I am going to, in the very same or a related video, make the food, like the ideal food accompaniment to that cocktail. Now, if I tell you Kansas and lime and sugar, what kind of food would be intriguing to you? I have something in mind. I have something in mind, but I'm interested to know as we create together what kind of food I should be making with that.
Well, you led off this show with the Virginia peanuts, and
right.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because that is the most compulsively addictive snack food maybe of all time. And then you started talking about these Ethiopian spices, so I'm kind of stuck. I couldn't, it's summertime, so you're going to want something. So I'm stuck on either maybe there's something where you could put those Ethiopian spices on the Virginia peanuts. But I think that if you're going to make a Kansas cocktail, you just want to have something, that's kind of, you don't want to ever drink on an empty stomach, but something light to let the citrus flavor come through of the drink. You could probably, if you're going to have a late afternoon cocktail, even a pizza would be fine. We're not fancy people. An awesome pizza. What did you have in mind?
It's say no more. I already know what the answer is. I'm going to tell you that I'm big on the whole kind of like what I call cross-cultural cuisine.
Yeah.
Where I essentially, as a guy that has been to a lot of different kind of places, and I like kind of multi-national flavors. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to produce for you. You don't even have to do a thing, because I still have. I'm going through it quickly right now. I've actually banged through a good 1/3 of this bottle. But that's it. I don't mean tonight. I did have some when it first arrived. I tried that cocktail the first time. Here's what I'm going to make, right? I'm going to make a drink that doesn't have a name yet, but in the same way that there's a classic caipirinha and then there's the vodka version called the caipirosca, I'm going to make the American version of that. It's going to be Kansas and muddled kind of lime and sugar. So we're going to make that. I'll figure out what the name of it is. And then what I'm going to do, as a cross-cultural guy, is I'm going to make Ethiopian spiced peanuts. And I reiterate that I have a little bit of a peanut problem. If there were a self-help group for peanuts, hello, my name is Rob. Honestly, it's not the most elegant nut in the world. I mean, let's not forget, there are macadamias, there are cashews, there are these beautiful pistachios, there are pine nuts. There's still, at the end of the day, give me a peanut. And when I say give me a peanut, I mean the kilo that they sell at Costco, the Virginia large, crunchy, salty. Or people go, you want to go to the ball game with me. And the first thing that comes to my mind is like beer and peanuts. Honestly, I don't care one iota about the freaking game. I live in New York. The Mets stink.
I'm with you. The
Mets stink. I mean, the Yankees are better. But the beauty of it is that you order the peanuts and you crack the shells and you throw all the garbage on the floor in front of you. It's the only place where you're entitled, really, to dump refuse perfectly fine right in front of you. Like cold beer, warm night, peanuts in a freaking shell, you dump the shell. So anyway, I'm going to be making a Kansas caipirinha with Burberry spiced peanuts. And if I have the ambition, I'm going to throw into that, my friend, what we on the East Coast called a bar pizza. Now, we don't have them in New York, but New Jersey is famous for the bar pizza, which is a pizza that is wafer thin. Like you literally, you're sitting at the bar, you have a beer on tap, you order a bar pizza, and it's wafer thin. Well, the way I make it is with a flour tortilla, right? So I take like a flour tortilla. It gets a touch of tomato sauce, a little bit of Mott's or Reggiano or whatever, and I toast it up so that it's like super thin. And you can't make it. No matter how many you make, they're going to be consumed. So if I have the energy, I'll throw the Jersey-based kind of bar pizza into the mix. But even if not, I mean, the Burberry spiced peanuts with some Kansas caipirinha is what I'm going to produce as a video, and then you can figure out, what to do with it. I really like the product a lot, and it's a beautiful package that it comes in. So while we only have a few minutes, two things. One is that when it arrived here, it came, as you know, Paul, in a plastic type of wrapping or package to protect it, which was easily the greatest packaging that I've ever seen for an alcoholic product in my life. I don't know. I do not know where you found that rubber. It is literally like not rubber. Obviously, it's like but I felt like it covered you as a prophylactic would. I mean,
it's a whiskey condom.
Well, I'll tell you something. It was hard to break through, but that's what the beauty of it was. I hated to actually cut it because I wanted to use it over and over again. So tell people, is it possible for people to order Kansas and have it delivered, or is that just me?
Yes, in fact, thank you, Rob. You can get Kansas online. Just go to the Kansas website, either kansascleandistilled.com or kansaswhiskey.com, and you click buy now, and you can just order. You can just order right there. It comes to your house within a few days. That whiskey condom is actually a wine shipper, and it's. I wanted to find something that was more ecologically responsible, because typically you're shipping in a lot of cardboard, and you're mixing that up with those foamy packing peanuts. And what's nice about this is that inflatable balloon into which the bottle goes is we have a pump, and you pump it up and it wraps itself around, and you can actually drop the bottle from about 6 feet with that thing wrapped, and it will not break. So that allows us to do a smaller footprint for packaging, and the actual balloon that it's in takes up, is a lot less plastic, and you can reuse that thing if you're careful about how you extract the bottle.
I was impatient, so I can't. But that said, ladies and gentlemen, here's what it is you want to know. Go to. I'm going to want you to pick up some Kansas. It comes in a beautiful package. It's tell people again quickly. The website is going to be Kansas what?
It's KansasCleanDistilled.com. Kansas, that's the name, or Kansas Whiskey, either one. KansasWhiskey.com is easier. We just started selling online about a month ago. So wherever you live on the planet, you're just a few clicks away.
I love that. It was a treat to talk to you. Before we take off, people, get yourself some Kansas. I promise you're going to like this stuff. It is a delicious product. And Paul and I are gonna do a video together to tell you how you can drink it straight up, like as I am right now, and it's great, or make some cocktails with it. I will also say to everybody, so that I'm back next Wednesday live at 8:00. We'll be talking about sustainability, which is an interesting subject, and I have an interview with a woman who runs a sustainability operation, and they do some super packaging that is good for our planet. Tomorrow night, everybody, is a class. Get in touch with me, shortorderDad@gmail.com, if you want to join the 15 herbs and spices that will change your life. And is there anything else? Yes, it's Father's Day coming up. Buy yourself a copy on Amazon of Short Order Dad, One Guy's Guide to Making Food Fun and Hassle-Free. Why? Because it's a book that dads will love, and yet at the same time benefits the rest of the family. Ladies and gentlemen, that's episode 81 of All You Can Eat with our friend Paul Goldman, talking about Kansas whiskey. Back with you next week, and until then, life is short, so never waste a meal.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on